Hey everybody, welcome to another video. A bit of a weird video, shorter but still weird. See, a little while back I finally decided to invest in a dual drive enclosure with redundancy so that I could keep every piece of footage I have ever filmed, main videos, B-roll, you name it, and have enough capacity to keep anything for the foreseeable future that I film. And boy did I go down a rabbit hole when it came to searching for the perfect enclosure for this channel. So let's dive into why the marketing and the rated capacity of these drives is just so misleading. For a bit of context, when I went to buy this enclosure, I discovered that buying drive enclosures, specifically dual bay enclosures, is a lot like buying a PC. You can either opt for a pre-built solution or you can buy the individual components and put it together yourself. I wanted to originally opt for a pre-built solution until I realized that the pricing was quite a bit up there. But you know, if it's worth it, then, might as well go for it. Then I know that it is fully secured, it's got a warranty, the whole 9 yards. Then I dove into the capacities, but we'll come back to that in a minute. What I actually went with was a dual drive RAID enclosure from Sabrent, which I'll probably do a review of at some point. I don't have enough hours into it yet to really have a solid opinion, but I'm liking it so far. I opted for that because it was a direct USB connect option instead of a NAS, but it still had RAID logic, meaning that I didn't have to rely on my Mac to build the RAID that I was going to use. As for the RAID I was going to use, I opted for two 18 terabyte Seagate Exos drives running in RAID 1, meaning that both drives are synced across one another, so if one drive were to fail, the second drive takes over and is an identical copy of the first drive. But the two main things that I just mentioned with that Sabrent enclosure were all I was looking for when it came to shopping for these devices, whether it be a pre-built or a build-it-yourself. I wanted RAID 1 redundancy in the case of a drive failure, so I didn't have to worry about losing my data, and I wanted to make sure that I had 18 terabytes. But I was a bit flexible on that and could have gone with something like 16 or maybe even 14 in a pinch, but I wanted 18 terabytes ideally. And I got both of those things with that RAID enclosure because I knew what drives I was buying. So let's get back to why the marketing and the storage listings for these pre-builts is so ridiculous. So going back to the pre-builts, when I was shopping around for the pre-builts, I was still debating between whether I wanted a NAS, a network attached storage solution, or whether I wanted direct access with a plug that just runs straight to my Mac. And I was actually still leaning very much towards the NAS until I realized that most of the time when I'm accessing footage, it's off my Mac Studio and nothing else. So I decided instead to go with a direct connect option. And that meant the price went down a bit, but the actual marketing didn't change. So I keep saying marketing and I keep saying capacity ratings. What am I talking about? Well, when you look at the selectable storage options on something like this Western Digital drive, you'll see that you have a ton of options. You can even go with 0, which I was tempted to do, but ultimately decided not to based on the price. We have options from 4, 8, 12, 16, 24, 28, 32, and 36. These are all divisible numbers because this is the total storage capacity, not the individual drive capacity. And you're probably thinking, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. Like that makes total sense. But when these drives are being marketed for their full capacity, but also being marketed for their RAID capabilities, you would think that they would potentially list the RAID storage capacity when they talk about the overall capacity in conjunction with their RAID capabilities. That sounded like a bunch of words that I'm sure some of you got lost on, so let me break down why that is so important. So RAID is a form of storage management that allows you to run multiple drives in sequence to one another in varying configurations. In the case of a dual drive system, the two main RAID configurations you can use are RAID 0 and RAID 1. There's also JBOD, which is just a bunch of drives. That's literally what it means. That is probably what most people who are looking for max capacity would run because you're just writing from the first drive. Once it's filled, it moves to the next drive, but we're going to focus on the RAID options. Now, we have already talked about RAID 1 because it's what I wanted to do with my drive configuration. So essentially, RAID 1 just means that the first drive in the rack or the first drive in the bay is your capacity. In my case, my capacity is 18 terabytes. However, you have a second drive that is mirroring the first drive. So in the case that one of them fails, you still have the exact same drive, the exact same format, the exact same amount of data on that secondary drive. And to rebuild a RAID 1 enclosure, you simply buy another identical capacity drive, slap it in the top, and depending on how much storage you have in the enclosure, give it a couple hours to completely rebuild the RAID 1 configuration, and you're back in business. But the key thing to take away from that is that the RAID 1 configuration means that the one drive that you're putting everything to is what sets the capacity for the entire system. So while, if you do the math, I have a 36 terabyte RAID enclosure, in reality, I have access to 18 terabytes of it. Well, okay, RAID 1 cuts your storage in half and makes sure that the half the storage you get is backed up on the second half. So what is RAID 0? Well, at these storage levels, RAID 0 is the dumbest thing you could possibly do. But I'll break it down for you anyway. RAID 0 is a configuration that allows you to essentially write to both of the drives in the enclosure in parallel. It turns both drives into one massive drive. So unlike JBOD, which is just a bunch of drives where it starts on the first one, fills that, and moves to the second one, both drives are being written to at the same time, in theory doubling your speeds. So it's a speed benefit. However, like I said, when you're dealing with this much capacity, it's not a good idea. In fact, it's probably one of the dumbest things you can do. But why? Well, because it's treating both drives as one massive drive, in the event of a drive failure over these two drives, one drive dies, the entire RAID is dead, and every piece of data that was written to that storage solution is gone. So armed with this piece of knowledge, when you look at how these drives are being marketed, you see that they are marketing them as one massive amount of storage, which means that the marketing team is essentially only focusing on RAID 0 and JBOD configurations. And when you go through the tech specs, it tells you there are two drives. It constantly tells you that the capacity is whatever the maximum is. But nowhere will you find a RAID 1 solution. And I know this because I have scoured so many different pages trying to find the capacity of the individual drives. Yes, I know I could divide them in half, but part of me wanted to believe that the storage capacity listed somewhere would be in reference to RAID 1, and it wasn't. Now, I'm sure a few of you who have watched up to this point are probably thinking, this is kind of a niche problem. I'm really making mountains out of molehills here, but let me bring this back to a more non-pro consumer perspective by showing you something that is very feasible. We're not going to go looking at Western Digital's $1,200 storage solution with 36 terabytes. We're instead going to look at the more consumer approachable 4 terabyte solution for $270. So let's say you see that $270 storage solution with 4 terabytes and it claims redundancy or dual drives, and you're thinking, that's awesome because that means that I can have a drive failure and not have to worry about losing my storage. So you buy it. $270 is not a bad price for a 4 terabyte drive enclosure. I remember paying $80 for an 8 gigabyte flash drive when I was in high school. These storage prices nowadays we're so spoiled. But okay, you buy it, you take it home. The model that I'm looking at specifically requires software, but the software does a very good job of explaining what the different RAID and JBOD configurations are. So you get it and say, yes, I want my enclosure to have fully backed up storage, so I'm going to do RAID 1 because this is the one that's telling me that my storage will actually be redundant, backed up, safe. And now you have half the capacity you originally thought you bought. That kind of sucks. Or in an even worse scenario, you just configure it and say, okay, this one says speed and capacity, I'm going to do that, and you pick RAID 0. Now, if one of those drives dies, all of your data is gone, and there's no way of getting it back. That's really terrible. Look, I'm not saying that these companies need to go and change the eye-catching maximum capacity that they're listing on their websites, but what they need to do is be significantly more clear with their verbiage. The whole reason I went with build your own instead of just going with a pre-built and taking the easy route is not because I'm a tinkerer and I want to play around with it, even though I've had my entire enclosure in all of its individual components within 24 hours of owning it. I went with it because I hated the fact that the overall specs sheet doesn't have a nerd level spec sheet that you can dive into. It doesn't have each individual drive's capacity. It's just max capacity over 2 drives. If you know what RAID 1 is, then do the math, divide it, you'll figure it out, don't worry about it. Again, I don't think these drive manufacturers need to not show the maximum capacity. I think that's completely fine because it catches the eye. But what they need to do is, on the product page of these devices, they need to make it clear the capacity of each individual drive and not just add them together and say, well, you'll figure it out. Like, you have a great set of descriptions for RAID 0, RAID 1, and JBOD. Just put that on the website, and then under the RAID 0 configuration, put the maximum, and then under RAID 1, put each individual drive's capacity. Just make it easier for the people who want to buy an inexpensive enclosure that redundantly backs up their data by just having clones of the drive in the enclosure. That's the whole reason I wanted to buy it, and the fact that your solution to the drives being a RAID 1 configuration was to just say, oh, it's 16 terabytes, when in reality it's two 8 terabyte drives, is just dumb. I know this seems like such a niche thing, and I hope that my scaling it down to something more realistic helps some of you in figuring out what I was talking about or understanding why I think it's such a big deal. But overall, I'm just glad that I was able to figure it out and go and get the solution that fit my needs best. But I felt like I needed to make this video to just make sure that if anybody else finds themselves in a similar situation, maybe not with as much storage, but a similar situation to mine, that they would have this to come to and be able to see that maybe, just maybe, you'll have half the storage if you actually want to make sure your data is redundant. Either way, that's been it. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to like it. If you really liked it, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss other content like this. I have a whole bunch of other stuff. Also, it's Friday when this video is coming out, so this evening I should be live watching a bunch of stupid memes that my Discord puts up, so you can join the Discord down there and join in the fun. It'll be about 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and, well, we do it every Friday because I'm going to go until I hit the bottom of the memes channel, and I don't think I ever will. But either way, that's been it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Make sure to be there, and have a good one. Oh, I sell shirts, too. This isn't one of my shirts, but yeah, I sell shirts. Go check them out down below. Yeah, bye.